Welcome to Redirect, Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined shortly by our co-host and fellow immigration attorney, Matthew Archambault. This week, we're also joined by Luis Cortes. He's an incredible attorney, personal friend. I mean, not to brag, but, I'm friends with him. He's also kind of famous. He is a dreamer and was involved in the DACA case before the Supreme Court. He also had a video that went viral that we're going to talk about. I think it was about a week ago. He posted a video of him reuniting his mother with her parents after some 30 years. Now, his mother is undocumented. She's unable to travel and return to Mexico. And so Luis struggled with the process of getting his grandparents' tourist visas to visit from Mexico. If you're Canadian, you don't even need a visa. You can just come over with your face and probably a passport. But if you're Mexican, you have to go through this long process of proving your intent and proving that, in fact, what you want to do is just come and visit. And often the assumption is, well, no, we think that you actually want to come and work, or you want to come and stay, or whatever the assumption might be, depending on the case. And that can be really hard, sometimes impossible to overcome. And I say this, I guess, a few times throughout the episode, but people don't understand how we talk about family separation and at the border, but really our entire immigration system is set up with family separation in mind in different ways. I've talked before about how the Bracero program, the temporary farm worker program, brings these men over, but not their families, separates them from their families for months at a time. And how hard that would be. Imagine leaving behind your wife and children to come and work for 5 or 6 months at a time. And then the way that we've militarized our border and closed off the borders for Mexicans has made it so that people who are undocumented, or even sometimes semi-documented, people with certain types of visas who are allowed to be here legally, aren't allowed to travel to Mexico and return. And so one of the major questions we confront as immigration attorneys is, I'm here, I have a U visa, or I'm here and I have a temporary work permit of some kind, or I'm here and I'm totally undocumented. How can I see my family in Mexico? And unfortunately, so often the answer is there's not really a way. So Luis is going to share his experience with getting his grandparents here. I think it's useful because he was inundated with requests for information and an explanation for what he did to try and get his grandparents here, because there are literally thousands of people just like him and his mother who, all they want to do is embrace the ones that they love. So really grateful for Luis for coming on. The show ends a little abruptly. We had some technical issues, so there's that. If you like the show, you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, leave us a review, go to patreon.com/redirect, become a patron, leave us a couple dollars a month. We really appreciate it. And for every 100 patrons, we take a pro bono case. We're sitting steady at about 130, so we're right there. Enjoy the conversation with Luis.
Our savior is Mike Bloomberg. Just get me off. I don't want to go. I don't want to be here anymore.
Are you asking me?
What's 2024? They're going to run Facebook, dude.
You're asking me to get you off?
Hey, we can do that at BYU now.
Look at your... Anyways.
Waste and fraud.
All right. So we're here with Luis Cortes.
What up, what up?
Friend of the show.
He's transmitting from a cave somewhere in, is it Washington State, or are you in Idaho in a cave, or Montana?
Hold on. Is it hard to hear me?
No, but you do sound like you're in a cave.
Oh, 1 second.
Are you in hiding? I don't blame you. He's in his bat cave. Luis is actually Batman.
Luis, you went viral with a video of, first of all, I got to criticize you a little bit on the lighting in the video. Now, this was like a big family thing, right? It's a big deal. And the lighting was a little poor.
Someone also criticized me for the video being vertical.
Oh, yeah. You'll get photographer people on you for that. That's a big one. But so tell us about...
has he failed in any other way before we go on with this story?
I wasn't real impressed with your outfit. I'm not sure that it matched.
And the hair? I mean,
The
you can do
hair
a little
was okay,
better.
but, I mean, you could have gotten a haircut before.
Yeah.
Seems like maybe you prepare for a moment like this. I don't know. I'm just kidding. No, but for people who are unfamiliar, let's set the table. What happened? Why did you go viral?
So there were some photos that were leaked. No, I'm just kidding. The video actually was of my mom seeing her parents for the first time in about 30 years. It was like the moment that she had seen them and they had seen each other, and then like the shock expression and look on her face. And so the video itself is like a minute and a half long, but it's pretty potent in emotion. I had posted it up mostly because this didn't take place just now. This took place months ago. But my phone was getting full of like storage. And so I was like looking for things to delete. And that video was one of like the first videos on my phone. And I kind of had forgotten that I had it. And so I had posted it on Twitter, mostly for like my 10 Twitter friends that like are also immigration attorneys. And I figured they'd get a kick out of it. And then next thing you know, it's like hitting in the millions of views. So it was definitely unexpected.
So
this wasn't the cat video?
Yeah, Matthew thought we were going to talk about your cat video. So let me just ask you, were you worried about like health concerns, like maybe a negative cardiac reaction? Is Luis still there? He just texted me, did I lose you fools?
Well, let me answer for him. Yes.
When you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Did you catch the debate? And they're talking about...
No, I value myself. I value my time, my sanity.
They brought up a Bernie tweet. Bernie tweeted like a year ago that billionaires shouldn't exist. And then Chuck Todd asked...
Mayor Bloomberg, should you exist?
Chuck Todd with all the...
I just thought it was funny because the question is not whether like the people should exist, but whether they should have that much money, obviously. But Chuck Todd took it as like a literal firing squad type situation.
Wait, it's not? I might have to rethink my endorsement.
Yeah. So,
Is Luis back?
Hey, sorry about that. I was like rambling on, and I was like, oh, I'm not getting a response. I think something went wrong.
Yeah, no, I think we can hear you now.
I filled in the blanks.
Yeah. So were you worried that your mom might have a negative health reaction? That was my concern watching the video.
Low key, yes. I legit thought that she might have a heart attack, like a legit heart attack.
Mm-hmm. And you did it anyways. So,
and then, yeah, I was like, I'm sure I'm in a will somewhere. So right. I was like, it's fine.
Cool. Now, I think one thing that people don't realize is, I don't know, maybe the question I get most often, I mean, obviously the number one question for an immigration lawyer is like, can I get papers and how? But the very next question for me, dealing with primarily a Mexican clientele, is how can I get a permit to see my family in Mexico, right?
Yeah, or like how can they come visit me?
How can they come visit me? So talk about the process of getting your grandparents here.
Yeah, so the first thing, I think like just how you mentioned, like the first thing I tried to see is like my mom could go over there. But the immigration laws being what they are, that was effectively impossible. And so then I thought, well, what if we can get my grandparents, to come over to the U.S.? And so the most appropriate visa for them to do so was a visitor's visa. You know, it's known as a B1, B2 visa. So we decided to go with that. And so the first step, because once this video started hitting, I got legit thousands of messages from people in a very similar situation or the exact same situation where they have loved ones abroad that they haven't been able to see. For some people, it was too late and the loved ones have passed away. And for some, they still wanted to try what they could. So they asked, like, what are the first steps? So the first thing that I did was that once I figured out there was a visitor's visa, the B1, B2 visa that I needed to apply for, you can actually do that from anywhere on somebody's behalf. So I was able to fill out the application here online. It's called the DS-160. And it's a long electronic form that includes a lot of biographical information. So you have to have a lot of that ready because, as you may know, Stephen, the website is timed. There's like a timer on it. And so like if you're inactive on it for a while, it'll boot you out. Mm-hmm. And so I had to make sure I knew where like they lived and their address history. all of their biographical information. They, of course, needed to have a passport ready. And so we needed all their passport information. So anyway, we filled out that application, the DS-160, and that was the first step. Then we have to pay for it, of course. You have to pay for every application that is submitted to the Department of State. And I think it was like $325, if I'm not mistaken, something like that.
That's right.
That we had to pay in order
Did
to...
you get your grandparents to pay you back?
Oh, of course. I was like, you guys are working this off in indentured servant style.
Exactly. Very good. Very good.
I was like, I was raised in America after all, so I know how to get them those.
There's no such thing as a gift, basically. This is a loan.
Once we got the application submitted, then it was just a matter of scheduling an interview. And so they're like in the middle of rural Michoacan. And so the nearest consulate, U.S. consulate near them was in Guadalajara and Jalisco, which is about 5 hours away. And they had to take a bus there each time. So we had to make sure to do it far enough in advance so they could get bus tickets and whatever. And so each time we would plan it out to like 2 months out so that we could have all the paperwork ready. Like I had mentioned online when I uploaded the video, they were denied a bunch of times. And that was really frustrating because the U.S. consulate has like wide discretion to deny visitors visas. And sometimes, at least it's been my experience, that they don't always give you a reason. Sometimes they're just like, nah.
No.
Yeah.
But let's just back it up for a second and talk about, I mean, just in general, what are they looking for? I mean, what is the criteria in general?
Really what it comes down to, I think, is that the consulate officer wanted an abundance of proof that my grandparents, who like are in their 70s, were not going to come to the U.S. to work or come to the U.S. and stay here.
Right. So it's all about proving intent. You actually want to be a photo snapping, socks and sandals wearing tourist.
Right. Where the sunblock on your nose and all that.
Exactly.
At first, you would think that they have like a little house in Mexico and they have lived like legit 70 years of their life there. So they still have all of their stuff there. So that first wasn't enough. So then we tried showing that they had assets, like financial assets, like money in their bank accounts and things like that, to show that they're not going to just leave all that money there. That wasn't enough. Then we tried to show that we got them airline tickets there and back already so that they had a return date. We tried to invite them for like certain events like Mother's Day or something like a graduation, and that didn't work. So we were kind of hitting a bunch of roadblocks and we didn't know what else to do. And by the fourth time that they said no, like our spirits were pretty low. We didn't think it was ever going to go down.
Yeah, so it sounds like you needed a good immigration lawyer.
A better one.
So what changed then? What happened on time number 5?
Well, on time number 5, my grandpa, he's deaf and mute because he had like some infection when he was a little kid that was untreated and then impacted his hearing, which then impacted his speech. And so he has a bit of health problems. And, you know, as people get older, more health problems develop. And so he just had a bunch of doctor's visits that were coming up. And one of the things that he had with them and that we showed was that he couldn't stay for very long because he needed to go back to like finish all his doctor visits in Mexico with a doctor that's been treating him like all his life. And that, at least in our case, was what did the trick. The consular officer realized that there's like a bunch of health stuff that my grandfather needs to come back for. And so they're like, okay, I'm convinced that you're actually going to come back. And they were issued the visas the 5th time around.
So where are they working now?
Exactly. Where are they living secretly and where are they working and under what names?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's so true though. I think we all get it from some people end up having to like actually, if they have the opportunity to petition for their parents for permanent residency, having to actually do that. I've had so many people, friends and clients who have been trying to get their elderly parents tourist visas to just come see them and their children. And they'll be denied saying, oh, well, you have a U.S. citizen son or daughter. They should just petition for you. And they just don't want to live here permanently. And somehow, like some consulate officers cannot understand that.
Right. So for people who don't know, so let's say Matthew's mother was living in Mexico. He could file a petition for her, and assuming she qualifies, she could come with a green card. But a green card holder is supposed to like actually reside in the United States, about half the time and have some things here like a domicile and all these different requirements. And for a lot of older folks like Luis's grandparents or Matthew's mom in this hypothetical, they are legit not interested in doing that. And so they apply for a tourist visa, which is the appropriate sort of way to come to the United States. And they're denied because the officer is, like Matthew said, assuming that, no, what Luis's 70-year-old grandparents, what they really want to do is come and enjoy our freedom.
We have a friend from Peru whose parents had applied 12 times for a tourist visa and they were denied. And she's a U.S. citizen, our friend. So I ended up applying for a green card for them, helping her with the green card process. And about 2 weeks before the mom's green card interview, she told me, I'm going to go apply for another tourist visa. I'm like, that's silly. You're just going to get your green card. Just come over on a green card and you can do whatever you want. She's like, no, I don't want a green card. And I'm like, they're going to deny you again. And she went and the officer looked at her and said, you've been denied 12 times and you have a green card interview coming up in a couple of weeks. And she said, yeah, I don't want to live there. He's like, all right. And then he approved the visitor visa. It's like, seriously, people. It is crazy. But I mean, we get a lot from people asking, and sometimes I feel it's hopeless for many people to try to get a tourist visa. But I'm glad that you persevered and your grandparents got it here.
One of the things that I was worried about is that just because they get granted a visa doesn't necessarily mean they're guaranteed entry to be here. Customs and Border Patrol, whether it's at the border or whether it's at the airport, they could still turn them away and be like, nah, you got to go back because we still unconvinced that you're not going to stay. So once they were granted the tourist visas, it wasn't a complete sigh of relief yet until they actually got in. And, we were able to see them at the airport. But I was still a little nervous that they were going to get turned away, the day of their arrival. And to Stephen's point, I think he was right on that. The visa was issued for 10 years. So they have permission to enter and leave the United States and within a 10-year span. But every time they come in, they're only given permission to stay for a certain amount of months. And the first time they were allowed to stay for about 6 months, but they didn't want to stay the whole 6 months. I mean, they were glad to see family, but they also found it very cold. And, they were used to a much slower pace of life. My mom lives in the Bay Area. And so, that's kind of the hustle and bustle of the city. And so they were also very eager to go back and be able to visit later, maybe when it's a little hotter. So they had no intention about staying here, right, longer than the 6 months. And they actually left quite before then. But I think, given the opportunity, a lot more people would be in the same boat.
I had a consultation a few years ago with somebody who'd come, they were paroled to seek asylum. It was an elderly man with a cane. He came in with his kids who were already living here. I went through the whole sort of fear screening and, the consultation. And at the end, the guy, this very elderly man, was like, I'm talking about make sure you don't miss your court and it's coming up and this and that. And he's like, I want to leave immediately. I don't want to be here. It turns out like they kind of just heard that you could go to the border and ask for asylum and get in. And they thought that this was a great way to get their dad here. And so the dad came and the dad was like, get me out of here. Like, I don't want to. This is the worst place. Can I just please leave? And I was like, oh, yeah. I mean, I guess you can leave anytime if you want. But, it's hard because they do have to do a balancing act. And there's plenty of people who say they're coming to be tourists and then stay. And so how would you weigh those factors, or how would you change the way they weigh those factors?
It's weird because they only do that with some people. They don't necessarily do that with everyone, right? Like Canada, they're not even under a visa waiver program. They're under a visa exempt program.
Right.
And so they don't need a visa. So I think particularly when it comes to Mexico, where they're the U.S. neighbors, I think that there's so much that can be done if the relations were somewhat stronger and that there were that flexibility to have more people come in and out of the country with a tourist visa, right? And I think the tightening of that scrutiny is what ultimately led to having the large undocumented population that we have now, where because people can't come in the United States to visit family freely and come to work, most people just end up staying because they might not have that second opportunity to come here. And so I see it a lot like one of those finger traps, like the harder you're trying to pull on this, like the tighter it actually gets. And so I think that being more, realistic of the situation, that a lot of people do want to just come here for a temporary time and leave will ultimately, I think, cut down on like border crossings and undocumented immigration generally. That's my sense.
Right. There's a huge segment of the undocumented population that, if they could choose, would maybe go back to Mexico for a year and give life there a shot. And if it doesn't work out, they like to come back because they have family and ties here, or maybe travel with the seasons, come back and forth. And because the laws have tightened, like you're saying, I guess I'm just repeating what you're saying, but they no longer have the flexibility of coming and going that they might have had 30 or 40 years ago. And so again, I can't reiterate enough how many of my consultations are people who have kids here, long-term employment. They've lived here for 20 or 30 years, like your mother, and they don't want to abandon this country. This is the country they've grown to love, and this is where they have all those things. But they want 2 days in Mexico because their mother is dying or their father is dying, or they just haven't seen them for so long. People don't have to be dying for you to want to see them. And oftentimes there's no option for them. The choice is very permanent, right? So if you're free to leave, you could go visit them, but then you're not free to come back.
Well, the good news is that it's going to be a lot harder for people to come in legally now. So that's going to fix all the problems, right?
Here's kind of one of the glaring things that I noticed from, not just from the video, but like what I was able to get from having my grandparents visit. To me, it really underscored the importance of the advanced parole portion of DACA. I mean, my mom hadn't seen her parents for 30 years, so I hadn't seen my grandparents for that long, essentially since I was like 1 year old. So I didn't really know them. And I felt like, there's a whole generation missing from your family. But not only that, but once my grandparents were here and I was able to talk to them a lot more, I was able to get to know my mom a lot more in a way different setting, right? Like I was able to hear stories of when she was younger and what she was like when she was a kid, and like those kind of stories that my mom doesn't necessarily have a full memory of, right? Or she has like a little kid memory version of it. So my family certainly felt fuller. My family history felt fuller, like getting to know my grandparents and seeing them. And I didn't take advantage of the advanced parole program when it was around. And obviously, when we were fighting the DACA injunction, one of the things that Judge Alsup did was that he characterized advanced parole as like an opportunity to, quote, vacation, which I think was a huge mischaracterization as to what the advanced parole program actually does. But what I'm very much looking forward to is that if the DACA program is restored fully by the Supreme Court, including advanced parole, that individuals get the opportunity to bridge those gaps with a generation that might be completely missing.
Right. So because we have tens of listeners who maybe don't know what we're talking about. When DACA came along, one of the sort of side benefits that they offered was advanced parole, which is basically a re-entry permit. So again, somebody like Luis is certainly allowed to go to Mexico, but they're not allowed to return. And so this was a re-entry permit that would allow them to go. And it certainly was not a vacation type of permit. In fact, you had to establish in your application some sort of humanitarian reason or a scholarly reason for the travel. And that usually involved exactly this situation that you're describing. I haven't seen my grandparents, or they're feeling ill or whatever. And that allowed people with DACA to travel abroad temporarily and re-enter the country. And when Trump, or I should say Jeff Sessions, with his ear-to-ear eating grin, announced the end of DACA, it was also the end of advance parole. And in all the lawsuits that have been happening, there has been, I guess, an injunction on, people who have DACA, they're allowed to renew, but that part of it, the advance parole, the reentry permit, has been off the table since September 2017, right?
That's right.
Right. And so all of these things are so complicated and, immigration reform and all this stuff. One of the things that was going to be so huge when President Obama announced DAPA, which is basically DACA, but for the parents, for me, and in my experience with my clientele, people were more excited about the possibility of visiting their parents with the advance parole that would accompany that than they were about a work permit. I mean, obviously a work permit helps in a lot of different ways. It's not like they weren't excited about that. But the prospect of visiting family was just so huge. And if we could get a president in November who aggressively pursues DAPA and DACA and gets those programs reinstated, or I guess initiated in the first place, that would be so huge, right? And it's doable.
Is it?
Okay. Well, listen, I'm trying to end the show on a good note.
One of the things that I will say, like for people, because I did get, I want to make sure that people know that since my grandparents were able to come, we've also had a few clients who would want to try for their family members to get a visa. And we've had, it's a lot of trial and error, but we have had some success with visitors visas from people who have previously been in the United States without status and had left. And they were able to get visitors visas, people with pending petitions. So that take a long time, like sibling petitions, or when a parent files a petition for their adult son or daughter, those take forever. And I always worry about those because, again, the intent is what counts of whether someone's actually going to intend to stay or not. And I always imagine that if there's a petition pending, then that would show the intent to stay. But we've gotten, some success on that. So if anybody's in that similar boat, then, just keep trying. Like Matthew said, there was a client of his that on the 12th try, it happened when they didn't think it was going to happen. So there is some hope up there. We are seeing some successes happening, but it's for people who keep trying. So for people who might have lost hope, I would just say to them to keep trying.
Right. So for people who are looking to apply for tourist visas, they should call Luis. They should inundate his office.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard he's doing it for free, which is nice.
No, that's not true. That's not. He's taking a modest $25.
$25. Oh, wow. That's, Okay.
But he'll waive it. There's a fee waiver application that you can do for him. So he'll be happy to waive that fee.
He says he lost us again. So I think, you know what? I got to run because I got to go to the freaking doctor. I got the coronavirus. But we might just end it there.
I hope everything goes okay with the doctors.
Yeah, okay.
Because if you have the coronavirus, you're not going to be able to come visit me at the end of March.
Honestly, like if I'm dying, it's not so sad. Let it be of natural
cause. Let me know because I'm going to have an extra ticket I'm going to have to get rid of. So
that's true. All right. But I got to leave you the podcasting equipment in my will. So I'll get right on that today. All right. Later, man.
Love you. Bye.